It was January 1919. Just 2 months earlier, the First World War had concluded, and President Wilson was still in Europe negotiating his 14 points. Just 2 weeks earlier, former President Roosevelt had passed away, and soon, the second wave of Spanish influenza was about to spread across the U.S., claiming 500,000 lives in its wake. But for the citizens of Boston, a very different sort of disaster was looming. The trouble started at a large storage tank near Boston Harbor, which was owned by the Purity Distilling Company. The tank contained over 8.5 million liters of molasses, which was used for making alcohol. To understand what happened next, it's important to keep 2 things in mind. If you've ever been to Massachusetts in January, you know that winters are quite cold, usually just below freezing. And if you've ever eaten molasses, then you know that it's thick and sticky. Now imagine keeping maple syrup in your freezer and pouring that cold syrup on your pancakes. It would barely ooze out of the bottle, but if you heat it up, it would flow smoothly. In the same way, when transferring molasses from the ship to the storage tank, it was often heated, and that's just what happened when this tank was refilled the day before. But if you know anything about fluid dynamics, you know that liquids also expand when they're heated, and they contract when they're cooled. And on that unseasonably warm day, the heated molasses began to expand the older, cold molasses in the tank. Now, even for a structurally sound tank, 8 million liters of expanding molasses is a lot of stress, and this tank was anything but structurally sound. The tank often made groaning sounds when it was filled, and it was rumored to leak so badly that the company painted it brown to hide the leaking molasses. The girders and rivets were poorly constructed, and routine safety inspections were almost never carried out. This was a recipe for disaster long in the making, and at 12:30 p.m. on January 15th, that disaster finally struck. Witnesses described the explosion like a loud clap of thunder, followed by the ground rumbling like an earthquake. Others reported the sound of machine gun fire, most likely the sound of rivets popping from the cylinder. Sections of the steel panel of the tank flew off to the nearby rail station with enough power to knock one of the trains off the track. But more deadly than the explosion of the tank was the resulting wave of molasses as tall as a 2-story building. The sticky tsunami ripped through the city at speeds of close to 60 kilometers per hour. Nearly as fast as a car, ripping nearby buildings from their foundations, hurling cars into Boston Harbor. In the end, 21 people either drowned in the molasses or were crushed by the debris that was swept along. A further 151 people were injured, as well as many horses, dogs, and other animals. A report from the Boston Globe reads, "Molasses, waist deep, covered the street and swirled and bubbled about the wreckage. Here and there struggled a form. Whether it was an animal or human being was impossible to tell. Only an upheaval, a thrashing about in the sticky mass, showed where any life was. Horses died like so many flies on sticky flypaper. The more they struggled, the deeper in the mess they were ensnared. Human beings, men and women, suffered likewise." In an ironic twist of fate, the very next day, the 18th Amendment was ratified, prohibiting the sale and manufacture of alcohol in the United States, and beginning the era known as the Prohibition. It was speculated that the Purity Distilling Company was trying to speed production before the law was enacted, which is why the tank was filled to capacity, something that they rarely did. Cleanup of the immediate area took weeks, and the harbor was brown with molasses for months. Bystanders tracked the sticky syrup onto train carriages, phone booths, and all over the streets, making cleanup of the Boston area take months, and residents say that the sweet smell lingered for decades. According to one report, everything that a Bostonian touched was sticky. Even to this day, some people claim that on a hot summer's day, you can still smell the faint aroma of molasses in the air.